guys, welcome to Maritime Punk. This week I'm with Diesel Boys, Diesel Dave. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So formed in 1993, Santa Rosa, the kings of puns, dad jokes before they were big. Tell me a bit about how...
Yes. We're very ahead of our time, yeah.
I know, right? So tell me a bit about the beginnings, what you remember of the early days of Diesel Boy.
I always say that the early days were kind of the most fun. Maybe the period in between when we started and things really started to happen. The band started in 1993, like you said, and with some friends from college. Sonoma State University is where I went to college, which is in the wine country of California, and met a dude in my radio class. I was the music director of my college station, and was really involved in that and loved that, and made a bunch of contacts doing that helped me out later on. But so the band started there with a friend of mine, and I hadn't really written a bunch of songs up to that point. It was really, sort of sink or swim. Started writing songs. I don't know that I had the intention of being the singer, but I was the best singer of the bunch, so it fell to me. Yeah, we were up and running. College friends would come see us, and it was a college town. So it was an okay music scene. There was a lot of stuff happening. We were about an hour from San Francisco, so we were close enough to like a big music scene that, we eventually started playing there and elsewhere. It took us a little while. I think we hadn't really, in the early days, we were much more of a kind of power pop, or maybe more strictly kind of pop punk, kind of Green Day influenced band. And then, there were some personnel changes over the years as we kind of kept going and kept playing. And then we eventually sort of found our way. We had a drummer who was a big fan of like the sort of skate punk kind of, drum beat, the Fat Records, Epitaph kind of stuff. And, at that point, I think our sound kind of shifted a bit more in that direction. And I think we tried to kind of meld the two, the two things. I wasn't a punk rocker until I got to college. I had a roommate my freshman year. And he played me Bad Religion's Against the Grain, and I was like, whoa. It was like super fast and heavy, but also super melodic, and I loved that. And Green Day were still a local band then, and kind of from our area, and so they would play around all the time. And this was probably maybe right around the time that Dookie was out, so I don't know what year that was, but Diesel Boy started in 93. Not Dookie, sorry, Kerplunk. They were still on Lookout and still kind of a local band, and they were popular, but certainly, they hadn't signed to the majors and gotten huge. So those were kind of the first two punk rock bands I got into, Bad Religion and Green Day.
What was it before? Were you a metalhead or just a mix of everything?
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally. Yep.
I've heard the references in your songs to metal, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was like an 80s pop kid growing up, Duran Duran, Men at Work, the stuff they played on the radio. And then, in high school and middle school, definitely a big metalhead. I grew up in Los Angeles, and so that was happening in Los Angeles. And so, not only was I seeing big shows like Iron Maiden and Metallica and stuff like that, but there were a lot of smaller bands at the time, like Poison and Warrant hadn't, broken out. And so I was able to go see those bands in clubs. And I was maybe 14, 15, 16 at the time. And definitely I was fairly non-discriminant in my, metal likings, and sort of ran the gamut from, the sort of hair metal stuff all the way up to the thrash kind of stuff.
Yeah. Have you seen Metallica on their recent tour?
I have not. I've seen I don't go to a lot of big shows. I go to a lot of shows in general, but it takes a lot to, paying hundreds of dollars to go to a show. I watched some clips on YouTube, and, the setup looks amazing with the, sort of multiple stages and all these monitors, and, the tour production has come a long way, since then, for sure.
When I started getting into vinyl, I was trying to recreate my collection I had on CD, and it's going to cost me a whole lot of money. I'm still trying to figure that out, but just looking up the bands that I used to listen to, and there's so many of them that are still active. Is it kind of cool?
You were also a teenage metalhead?
Yeah, well, metal then punk. It was kind of the same thing. I was 13 when Green Day released Dookie and Smash came out. So it was this whole kind of punk rock resurgence. And then I think those compilation albums came out, and the Survival of the Fattest, which is where I first heard Titty Twister, and that's kind of what brought me to Diesel Boy. So how
Yeah.
important were compilations back then? Because there weren't Spotify playlists, there wasn't background music and TikTok videos. Tell me how important it was, and maybe some ways you were able to notice, like, holy shit, a lot of people know our songs now.
Yeah, it's hard for me to separate out the compilations from signing to Fat. I guess they had done. There was one compilation that Fat had done before we signed. What was that one called? Now I'm drawing a blank. But the Survival of the Fattest was the second comp they had done.
It was fat music for fat people.
Yes, that's it. Fat music for fat people. Thank you. You know, I think there was some, even before that, even before Survival of the Fattest came out, just being on Fat gave us some cachet and some credibility. And, you know, they would advertise in all the fanzines and people would know. I mean, we did a 7-inch for Fat before our first full length came out. So having that association in general was great. But you're not wrong when you say that, you know, that compilation really kind of put us on the map. Everybody had those things. And even though people, I think, would see the ads in the fanzines or, you know, might eventually explore other bands, you know, people would look at the liner notes maybe and read the thank you list and see what other bands were thanked and then, you know, try and find bands that way. But to be able to have a song that gets in everyone's ears like that, you know, it was immensely helpful and definitely helped solidify our place as being like legit or cool or, you know, just gave us some credibility, the stamp of approval. And, you know, that song is by far our most popular song. And, you know, if you know one Diesel Boy song, it's going to be that one. And there's probably a lot of people that just know that song and that never got into the band, and that's fine too. You know, it's like having a song on that comp was sort of like as close to having a hit as you could have in punk rock. So, you know, it was super, super helpful. And, you know, the Epitaph had those Punk-O-Rama CDs. And I think those were popular too. And even just maybe not even just the label samplers. We had a song on the Punk Bites comp that Fearless put out, and I think we were the first song, and that was a great place to be. You know, in the mid '90s, was certainly comps were maybe at their heyday. You said they don't really exist anymore. I guess they used to back in the day. You know, I don't know, some weirder version of it where it was like, I see even afterwards during the 90s, they had all music and they'd have all the hits on, you know, like a 5 CD package or whatever. But that was certainly the era of comps. It was super helpful and man, really grateful for it. Fat did a 25th anniversary version last year maybe. And I didn't have the vinyl, so I bought the vinyl. And so it's nice to have that. And it was great.
Yeah.
Loved it.
So tell me what it was like being on Honest Ons. I didn't know this until recently, but I guess it was kind of a side gig of Fat that for bands that didn't really fit in with the Fat Records sound. And it was run by Fat Mike, wasn't it?
It was. We had done the 7-inch for Fat Records, and then we made the demos for the Cock Rock album and sent them to him. And he said he liked it, but he wasn't sure whether he wanted to put it out on Fat or not. And we were very disappointed because obviously we already had a relationship there and we loved that label and wanted to be on the label. Kind of trying to figure out what we should do as an alternative if we don't end up on Fat. Is there another label that would put out the record? And somewhere in that process of trying to figure out what we wanted to do, Mike called and said, hey, you know, I don't have any details. I want to do this other label. And the idea was, to have bands on it that didn't necessarily fit as squarely onto the Fat roster as maybe he wanted, but bands he still liked. And so he asked, hey, do you guys want to be the first band on it? At the time, he didn't have a name, only sort of this notion for what he wanted it to be. And without hesitation, we agreed. And, we booked studio time and went in and made the record. And at some point, I think while we were making the record, he's like, I got it. Honest Don's hardly used recordings. And we were like, okay. And sort of weirdly enough, I think, for a label that wanted to put out bands that don't necessarily fit on Fat, I think we were probably the most Fat sounding band on the label. There was a few others, I guess, too, that ended up there. But, there was definitely, at the time, there was a more unified sound for all those bands. He's branched out a lot more over the years, but back then, there were real kind of traditional kind of skate punk sounding bands.
Yeah.
And we sort of fit that mold, but maybe not quite as tightly as we could have.
There's been a few people I've been speaking with, and they all seem to have this common theme of getting honest, real good feedback from Fat Mike, knowing when you speak with him that he's going to tell you the straight up truth without bullshitting. Like, was that a really important thing to have, like a guy like that in your corner?
Yeah, I mean, it was, that's true. I guess the closest thing to that for us was that when we would go into the studio to make the records, we would often demo, so he'd have heard the songs, but he would come to the studio and sort of on the first day or, while we were kind of, before we really got into it, I would sit across from him. We'd both have guitars and I'd play through the songs and sort of show them to him real quick. And, he would make suggestions, tweak parts here and there, make melody suggestions. He would offer feedback if he thought some lyrics were weak or a section was weak. So he was definitely, wearing his producing hat. And he was not shy about saying if he didn't like something, and he liked to, I don't know how it is anymore because it's been a long time and we're not on the label anymore, but he always wanted to have a hand in sequencing the record. So that was always one thing that he wanted to do, is when it was done, he wanted to take a pass at sequencing it. About 10 years ago, we took a first shot at making the record that became Gets Old. And we had, some of the songs that ended up on that record we had demoed, and I sent them to him, and, he was pretty direct in his feedback. He said, I like about half of this, write this many more and you'll probably have a solid record. He didn't give specifics, I like this song, or this song. He said something, I'm paraphrasing, but something something along the lines of, I like about half of it. I like the ones where you don't sing like you're in Dawkins, or something like that. But I'm not sure which ones those were exactly. But yeah, I mean, I appreciated having a label chief who is a musician, and so sort of knows how to treat bands or what bands want, but also a creative and who has a stake and a feeling about the records. Zbam, the label that put out the record, Stefan's a great dude, but he's not a musician. So, the kind of feedback that he can offer is not, along the same lines as what a musician could, or, having a musician at the helm is pretty cool.
I've been reading about your connection with Canada and how you think that Canada may be the country where you became the most popular. Can you tell me a bit about some of your memories of Canada, traveling through the country, especially for us here on the East Coast and the Maritimes? Because seeing a lot of the bigger bands from Epitaph, Fat, Honest Dons coming through to our towns, it was a very, really special thing, because a lot of bands would stop in Quebec and not go further. So it was a real treat when we got to see some of the bands we were really into come down here to the Maritimes.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have any notion of that until we did our first big tour after we made Cock Rock. Strung Out took us on a 9-week tour. We've never done a tour that long since. It was an epically long tour, but it was the US and Canada sort of combined. And I remember those guys telling us, wait till we get to, Montreal, wait till we get to Quebec. You're not going to believe how many people are there. I don't know what it was about those places, but they loved their skate punk. They loved Fat Wreck and Epitaph bands there. And those places were always great, and not just exclusive to Quebec. All across Canada, Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, and like you said, we went to we played Nova Scotia a couple of times. We went all the way to New Brunswick on one tour. We would eventually, we would always, I think we would dip up into Canada on US tours, but we also did some Canadian tours where we would just do Canada. Vancouver to New Brunswick. I mean, that's a hell of a drive. And by the way, unbelievably beautiful part of the world that, I'm glad I got to see. New Brunswick was just like amazingly beautiful. And one of our other early tours was a tour called Snow Jam that was a Canadian tour, I guess in the winter. So we definitely were up there a lot. We had a good following, and nothing I can say yet, but I think we will make it up there in 2024. So
wow.
I'm anxious to get back there, and there was always a good punk rock scene there, and from what I can tell, it seems like there still is. Bands still go. You guys have got some festivals there that are sort of world class, and so always grateful to the Canadian tour. Also very nice. You can leave the country, and people still speak English, but you're in another country. I love Canada. I live in Seattle now, and enjoy going up to Vancouver, and I've always liked Canada. Nice people, nice country. So yeah, thank you, great. Canada.
Love it. Tell me a little about how much it means to have Greg Hensley, who was there from the beginning, still with you as an original member of the band, because there has been some band member changes. So just having one of the OGs with you from the beginning, what's that like?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if I would have done it, or if we would have done it if Greg were not on board. It feels like just having that through line. At least 50% of the band are sort of OGs, like you said. Not over the years. I moved up here to Seattle in 2000, and so I've been up here a long time. But it made trying to continue to be a band difficult, and we've tried over the years. And as over the pandemic, Greg and I sort of were talking more seriously about whether we could and should or wanted to do this again. And, not all of the original guys were able to do it or wanted to do it. We're all friends, and there's no bad blood, anything like that. But everybody's just different places in their lives, and not everybody's interested in trying to do it. But yeah, it's huge. I mean, not only just, from the point of view of, we have these, all this time under our belt on stage together and playing together and understanding each other, but this kind of shared history. I think it would have felt it might have felt too different if it was just me and three new guys. So having half of us be original members feels important, and like it's not an entirely new band, and it's a tie to our past and to all the things that we've done. And so I mean, I'm really glad that he is into it and still wanted to do it, and still in a place in his life where he can, afford to do it. It's a lot harder in middle age to make the time and the commitment to do this. We won't do it full time, but even as a hobby, which is kind of what it is, I guess. It's not easy, and he's the only one who lives not in Seattle now. So it's more work for him. He's got to get on a plane every time we go somewhere, or to practice before shows. So it's probably hardest on him. And he's got kids and a wife. And but yeah, gratefully he's a trooper. And we're in it to win it.
Exactly. So along those lines, you do have two other members that joined the crew. And I'm sure it's not an easy decision to bring someone into something like this, because it's your baby. So tell me a bit about who else you brought in and why you decided to kind of go with them.
It seemed like it was going to be easiest for some core of us to all be in the same place. And since I'm the kind of primary writer and I'm based here, it seemed like it was going to be easiest to get folks who lived around Seattle. it was not easy to find folks. I'm not super plugged into the music scene up here anymore because I haven't been super active in bands, and I don't have a rich network of people to draw from. And so it was a little challenging. But yeah, eventually found my way to Christopher. He was our drummer, and he was sort of the first piece. And he had been in a band and had done some touring, a band on Tooth and Nail, and so he knew the scene. And we've got there's definitely some overlap in our musical tastes, but also some not, which is nice. But great dude and great drummer, and so he was the first piece to come together. And then we found Chad, who played on the record, and we spent over a year just sort of getting to know each other as players and as musicians and as people, and spent a long time, working on the songs in Christopher's basement. One of the biggest challenges, I think, was trying to get this kind of hodgepodge of material, that some of which dates back like 10 years and some of which was written over the pandemic, to try and get all of that stuff to sound like one cohesive body of work. Like Diesel Boy, we wanted to make a record that our fans would hopefully like, but also didn't sound too far afield from where we started. It was challenging to find a producer up here who had the right vibe and the right sort of sensibility to make a record. There's definitely more. It seemed like there were more choices in California, and but we wanted to spend as much money on the record as we could and not have to travel. And so we eventually found our way to Matt Bayless, who is a rock star producer, and he'd done a lot of work he cut his teeth with like Pearl Jam and Soundgarden as an engineer, and then kind of made a name for himself recording heavier bands like Mastodon and Isis and Botch and some kind of hardcore stuff. But he's totally got a sort of pop sensibility, and that was super fun. And unfortunately, after we made the record, Chad wasn't able to kind of do some of the live stuff and the touring commitments that we had. And so we had to replace him. And so it's been slightly messy, but we found this kid, Jack, who coincidentally is also a YouTuber. And at the time when I was looking for guitar players a few years ago, Jack had sort of applied for the job, but he was younger. He was in his 20s, and I wanted to find older dudes just because I thought that made the most sense. But when Chad wasn't able to kind of do some of the stuff, I sort of reached out to him and said, "This is super random, dude. You applied, years ago, or I remember you sent me some stuff and I thought you were awesome, but, I sort of moved on because you weren't in the right age range, but, you're a shredder, and, do you have interest in coming down?" And he was super excited, and he did his homework, and he's a great guitar player, and he's in his 20s. The rest of us are in our 40s or 50s. But there's also something nice about having that youthful enthusiasm. And so it's been great having Jack. He has a YouTube channel called The Punk Historian. And so, and he's fairly, he's got a sizable following. So, when we were on tour in Europe and when we play shows, people do sort of know him from that a little bit. And it's always cool to see that connection too. So he knows a ton about music, and he's a great guitar player. He's very busy. He plays in like 7 bands. But yeah, it's been great. So it took us a little while, but, I think we finally have a sort of solid lineup, and, we won't tour full time, but, hopefully you'll do one longer thing a year, and then sort of weekend fly-ins and festivals and that kind of stuff when we can. Yeah. But having a home base in Seattle, at least the 3 of us can practice regularly. We do a lot of practicing without Greg, and then Greg will practice, either to recordings or, we'll record practice. And so, we all do our homework, but it's always nice when Greg can be up here like a day or two before we're going to go do something, and we actually have bass in the room, because we spend a lot of time practicing without bass, which is just not not ideal.
So on Gets Old, the first track on the album is Lost Decade, and it kind of tells the whole story of what happened to Diesel Boy when they disappeared off the face of the earth. So was that kind of like a bit of a humor thing, or was it important for you just so you didn't have to answer it every time you do interviews like this?
I mean, I guess yeah, no, I mean, I'm happy to talk about it in interviews too, but it seemed like the elephant in the room. And so, after you've been gone for 20 something years, it's like, well, we might as well put it in a song, what we've been up to. And it just seemed to make sense. I don't know. I don't remember the genesis of the idea exactly, other than, I did like the notion, as I sort of sing in the chorus, is it a reunion if no one cared we were gone or that we're back? And, there's definitely some of that too. It's been hard to, it's hard to get the word out. We haven't been on social media for the last 20 years, and we haven't been doing stuff. So I'm sure there's still a big subset of people that don't know we're back. Maybe there's some fans that don't know we've reformed. I'm sure there are. And, will we find some new fans? I don't know. But yeah, it seemed like a good way of I mean, a lot's happened. I guess that was that maybe that was the notion. There's a lot's gone on since we're just at different people at different places in our lives than we were when we were last doing this. Foremost, sort of dads and middle-aged dudes with jobs and whole different thing.
Yeah, and it creates a whole new perspective when it comes to songwriting too. So were there a lot of songs lyrically that you feel like were more mature or took a different direction than early Diesel Boy?
For sure. It's definitely much harder, I find, these days to come up with topics to write about, and the lyrics are generally the last thing that I do. Back in the day, I was there was a lot of romantic longing or breakups, and I think it was an easy well to go to. And there's some stuff like that on the record. I was married and divorced, and Dirty Dishes is a song kind of about my divorce. But there's been a lot of therapy since then, and not that romantic relationships don't ever plague me, but it doesn't take up as much of my brain space as they once did. There's a few songs from our catalog that make me bristle a little at their sort of I don't know. I was very sort of blunt, and there was no how can I say this? There's some stuff that's very sort of crude and crass, and not the way I would express myself these days. And a couple of those songs are they're not in our live set, and I'm just sort of like, not that I'm necessarily trying to distance myself from them, but maybe a little bit. Just not how I think and who I am at this point. So I would hope that while I hope people find some of the lyrics on the record humorous and entertaining. I hope that there's it also feels a little bit more mature. Even if the topics are the same, perhaps the perspective on relationships or on life just has 20 years more wisdom in it.
That's true. So I'm going back to Venus Envy.
Yeah,
it's probably one of those tracks you're talking about. So there was this secret song at the end of this album, and I have a kind of a funny story. So I used to listen to music a lot going to bed, blast it and fall asleep. The last track is, I'll just go out and say it, it's just some sex sounds, if that's the best way I can explain it. And it was probably blasting for about 15 minutes from my room. So I don't know if my roommate thought I was watching porn. The next morning was a little awkward. I didn't even bring it up because in my head back then I thought it was even stranger to just tell them, oh no, I wasn't watching porn. I was just listening. I was just listening to it. So I just kind of left it at that. Was this something recorded specifically for Diesel Boy in the studio, or did you just find a box of VHS tapes and like, yeah, let's just use the sound?
No, it was recorded specifically for Diesel Boy,
Was
not
it?
necessarily to be the you know to be at the end of the record, but the scenario that you just laid out was exactly kind of what we hoped would happen, or what we thought would be funny, is if we just let the record end and there was 20 minutes of empty space and people would forget that the CD was on, and all of a sudden this kind of rude awakening of lesbian sex. I believe that there's a song on there called "Rubbing the Elf" about a woman who likes to masturbate, and so we wanted to have some sounds, sort of before and after the song, inside the song, and the studio that we recorded that at was called Razor's Edge in San Francisco, and there was a house above the studio. And there was a woman who was living in the house at the time who had a girlfriend, and we brought the idea up, and she seemed game. She said, you buy me batteries for my vibrators, and we'll do whatever you want. And so we sort of put these big sound baffles up, and put a couple of microphones and maybe a mattress or some blankets down on the floor, and lit some candles, and we all ran off to the control room, and they had at it. And of course we giggled like schoolgirls because it was tittillating and funny. And we all sort of listened as it went on. And maybe I hope we bought them dinner or something too. I'd like to think we did, but I know we for sure bought batteries for their vibrators. But yeah, and then I think once we heard it, we were like, this is pretty hot, fairly titillating. Like, wouldn't it be funny if we, I remember the phone call to Fat Mike asking, can we put 15 minutes of lesbian sex at the end of the record? And, he was just sort of like, if there were emojis back then, I think he would have given us the eye roll. But ultimately, he's like, it's your record, sort of do what you want. And then we joked for years afterwards that, one of our subsequent records, so I don't know if you're a tennis fan, but if you ever watch women playing tennis, there's a lot of like grunts, and we had joked that we should record women playing tennis, and then that's what should be at the end of one of our other records. But thankfully that we didn't decide to do that. That's a thing also. I guess CDs are still around, but with streaming, the days of hidden tracks and whatnot are mostly gone. Rode Hard and Put Away Wet has a voicemail at the end of it too, we still, Gets Old is available on CD, so I guess it's possible. But I feel like the days of hidden tracks and sort of hiding weird stuff at the end are a thing of the past.
Yeah, I thought it was actually pretty hilarious that on Spotify there's if you have that track on Spotify called Extra Content.
Yeah.
So it is still there if anyone wants to check it out.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they haven't removed it. I wonder if there's any sort of hopefully I don't ruin it for you guys, but
yeah. Well, my sense is that the higher ups at Spotify are probably not watching too many podcasts.
True. Yeah. So tell me a bit about your life outside of music. You've done some writing, so tell me a bit about that part of your life.
Yeah, well, I ended up in Seattle because I was working for a music.com that was sort of doing what Spotify does now, but 20 plus years ago. So I was working for this music.com in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley. That got bought by Microsoft, and I relocated up here and sort of worked at Microsoft for about a decade. I worked across various projects at Microsoft, but mostly on the entertainment side. So it started in music and ended up also working in movies and TV, mostly overseeing content for their entertainment properties. So I was writing, but also managing team of writers, and producing content for the web. Um, and line and write stuff on the side, and that turned into doing some freelancing. And for several years, I wrote for Seattle Weekly and had a column, and would go interview bands, and so I've been kind of on both sides of it. I still sort of write for a living, but in a different capacity. So I have a business with my dad. We track trends and innovations in digital health. And we sell subscriptions to corporate clients. So, some of the big pharma and national insurers and digital health companies and the big technology companies. So I still do a lot of reading and kind of summarizing and writing, just in a different form. It's not quite so, it's not for the broader public, or, it's that kind of industry publication. I do miss the writing, and, I would love to do it more, but, I'm also a dad. I've got identical twin boys who are 15 and in high school. And so, being a single dad with a job and kids, and, now a hobby that takes up a lot of my time, unfortunately, I just don't have a lot of time to write. But I still love music writing. I read music books, and stay up to date on hopefully what's kind of happening. And I've always been an entertainment nerd. I love movies and TV and all that stuff. And I did enjoy interviewing bands and writing about that stuff. So I don't know, maybe someday it will come back into my life, but my hobbies tend to kind of ebb and flow, and, sort of one thing goes to the other. But yeah, so not a ton of entertainment freelancing these days, none basically. But I've got the band, and, I get to write for that. There's plenty of writing that goes into being, a band guy too, aside from the, Instagram posts or whatever. You got to write your bio, and you got to, I don't know, there's always stuff to do. So I still get to flex that muscle, just not in the same capacity. But I'm a word guy. I love crosswords. I love words. So, I'm a nerd for that kind of stuff for sure.
That's great. So what do your kids think of your music? Are they into the punk rock scene, or are they like a typical teenager that, like, you embarrass them no matter what you're doing?
Yes, the latter. They're not into punk rock. I've got this great record collection out in my office, and, I have this fantasy that, someday they're going to go out there and discover how cool I am and what awesome taste in music I have. And, they'll find these amazing obscure bands that they never knew, but they have, they've never picked up a record unless I'm sort of thrust in their face. I think that they think it's cool that, there's a Wikipedia page for my band, and their friends think it's cool that their dad's music is on Spotify or whatever, but they're not interested in the kind of music I play. And I'm often excited. They'll be like, "Oh, we just got the record back from the studio. Do you guys want to hear it?" And they're, not really. They like hip hop, and they like, what's popular and what, kids in high school are listening to. And maybe there's some kids in high school who are listening to punk rock, but not them and their friends. So, I think they think it's cool on some level, but not, they don't relate to it. That, and they don't really know my work. They know Titty Twister is our most popular song. And, and then I also think that kids their age don't have as much of a thing about, like old music. Like, it's music, like, we were listening to classic rock in the 80s, which was only like 10 or 15 years, before we were listening to it, made 10 or 15 years before we were listening, but it seems so old. And I think, kids now seem to have none of that seems to matter. It just is, it's like, it's all there, and it's all kind of the same. They don't categorize it in kind of the same way, which is great.
Yeah. So thanks so much for doing this. We definitely want to see you here on the East Coast at some point. I know that's in your plans for next year. So fingers crossed that you can make that happen, and definitely invite everybody to check out the new album.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's really fun to be doing it again, and I'm glad people like you still remember and want to talk to me, and really grateful that that I can add this into my life, and just makes everything a little bit sweeter, and I get to express myself and have an outlet for that, and it's lovely. I'm a lucky dude, so thank you for having me, and remembering the band, and I hope I think you'll be pleased that at some point soon we'll hopefully be announcing that we'll be closer to where you are, and I would love to play again soon for all of our Canadian fans and the people elsewhere in the States. I don't know, we're on the West Coast, so it may be hard to get to the East Coast, but eventually, we'll get there eventually.